Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the progressive movement, the conditions that caused the progressive movement, and how society addressed the progressive movement at the end of the Gilded Age. So as we get started this week, we're going to start with some reminders about extra credit for the course, and then we're going to talk about progressive reform during this window. So I wanted to take the time, since we're a few weeks into the course, to talk about extra credits. You have 2 extra credit assignments available to you for this course. So the first is to visit any historical site in Florida. Anything, a historical church, any historical monument, any historical marker, any public building, courthouse, state house, those types of things, right? And write a one-page assessment about something you learned. It could be anything at all about something you learned. It has to be in Chicago format. You can email it directly to me. I have to have it by the 1st of April. The second, right, is if 75% of the class completes the student feedback on instruction by the 1st of April, everyone in the class will receive a score of 100% on one of the weekly writing assignments throughout the course. Now, that rule applies to both of them. So if you complete both assignments, right, you do the extra credit for the historical site and complete the student feedback on instruction, 75% complete that, you can earn 2 100% scores on any writing assignment throughout the course. So I need both of those by the 1st of April. So as we start this course, as we do any of the other lessons, right, we're going to be discussing the people, who they really were, their relationships to what occurred during the era and to other people, their ideas, right, what their belief systems were, what values did they have, and then what their motives were. So the things that drove them, drove their behaviors and their actions. And as we move forward, let's try to keep the idea that all of these ideas are interconnected. So by the end of chapter 21, you should be able to answer these questions. For our lecture today, we're going to be discussing what led to the progressive reform, what the ideas of progressive reform are, how society attacked the problems that were occurring in the urban environment, and then the tenets of progressive theory. So as we get to the end of the Gilded Age, there was a massive change that had occurred from the beginning of the Gilded Age to the end of the Gilded Age. People had left the family farm. They were now completely dependent on big business to make a living. Most Americans were living in an urban environment that was dirty, overcrowded, and not well suited for the number of people that lived there. So society itself was not very happy with its conditions. Wages were dropping, the middle class was losing ground. So there was an increase in the poor, child labor. Also, there were no social safety nets at this time. So if someone were struggling, there was no way for a local government, municipality, or a city, or federal government for that matter, to lend a hand to help them. So the bottom line here is what led to the progressive era. It was the deteriorating conditions of the American worker and their families. This unrestricted capitalism, this laissez-faire capitalism that had run rampant for many, many years in the United States. So this big capitalism without restriction, the abuses of the workers, all led to the rise in the progressive movement. So as I mentioned a moment ago, that there were no social safety nets involved with American society. So we have to ask the question, when it comes to social care, what did the founders believe? What was the role of government when it came to taking care of individuals? When it comes to public care, the founders weren't involved. They believed the role of the government was to protect life, liberty, and property of individuals, and that individuals themselves would be selfish enough and determined enough, they would have that ambition to take care of themselves, and that any reach beyond life, liberty, and property violated constitutional law. So as the founders did not believe in progressive ideas or did not put forward progressive ideas in our Constitution, we have to ask ourselves, What are progressive ideas during the Gilded Age? As we think about the progressive ideas at the time in the United States, we also have to think about the influences from European ideas on those in the United States. And here we have Marx, who was pushing the idea, this philosophy that people were not satisfied with capitalism and that communism was a better choice. While this doesn't completely intersect with the ideas in the 19 in this era, these ideas did influence the idea of social welfare. The main ideas of the progressive movement were that communities have this right. They have a right to succeed. And those rights as a community are more important than the idea that an individual's rights are more important. So basically, the good of the many, to bring it to Star Trek, outweigh the needs of the one. So if this is true, that means that the government is then required to provide an environment. Now, remember, the word environment here is not what we think of in today's time as environment. This is the environment in which they live, they work, the ability to succeed, not necessarily the outdoor environment, and the means to improve themselves through education, through egalitarian actions to make themselves better people. And you have the progressive movement moving forward in the United States, you also have this idea within the Church of the United States that there is a social gospel movement. This basically is a way that the church got involved with instilling ideas against laissez-faire capitalism. Right? The churches could see the impact that this was having on their patrons, their parishioners, and they wanted change. So the church took action by spreading messages about reforming capitalism, about taking care of people. And these ideas between the social gospel and progressive reform, when merged together, were quite powerful during this time period saw their role not necessarily as simply saving souls, but to also help reform the ills of society. So you have to keep in mind with the ills of society at this time was excessive consumption of alcohol, domestic violence, there was crime of all sorts. Aside from crime, there's extreme poverty and depredation occurring. Then you have the upper class that believed in the social Darwinism. These ideas were completely at odds, so the church took complete aim at these philosophies. So given the extreme poverty and working conditions of Americans, the country had been abused for many years in these areas. The idea of cultural theory on reformation, on reform, the idea of social gospel and taking action to improve society, these are the foundations, these are the pillars of the progressive movement. So since the government didn't see its role as providing any type of social structure or social net for individuals, people in the middle class and upper class began to take action on behalf of their fellow man. One of those was to create social settlements or settlement houses. But what are they? These were essentially houses that were built around the country. They were flexible. The idea here was to be a location in a community where people of extreme poverty could come, where they could get a meal, they could take care of themselves, they could learn a language, they could be educated. Remember, there is no Department of Education in this time period. So this was a way for people, immigrants, people of extreme poverty to get themselves organized and to help get some assistance from the community and to help pull themselves up out of this depredation. The most famous of these settlement houses was in Chicago. This is Abigail Adams at Hull House. She said that the houses had three main goals. The first is to add some form of social safety net to democracy, incorporate something there to help people that need help, extend these ideas beyond the political sphere and make these improvements to people that actually need them. Also, People didn't have a place to congregate. There was nowhere for any organizations to meet and gather and to become cohesive. She opened her doors to these organizations like the Women's Christian Temperance League, different unions, places for people to come together and they could meet to help change society. She also invited in school teachers and educators to come in and educate, to teach language to those that needed it. Second goal that she identified with Hull House specifically was that the middle and upper classes could see people at the lower level suffering so much, and they were compassionate. They wanted to help, but there was no real way for them to help outside of church. So this was an opportunity where people of the middle and upper classes could go to these centers and donate their time or donate resources to help to help those in need. So this was a way for society to help use to collectively work together and use their individual resources to help their fellow man. Third goal here that Adams had at Hull House was one of a religious nature. She had the idea here that the spirit in all people stresses interdependence on human beings and the power of love, that all people need love. However, she didn't endorse any single religion, and all religions were welcome within her center. That's really important when we consider the people who used Hull House. These were people from all over the world that had come to the United States, had different languages and customs, and certainly different religious beliefs. Here was a place where they could come together and practice freely without risk of persecution or discrimination. So while people in social settlements were taking aim at reforming society through education and organization, the religious end of things was taking aim at social evils, things like extreme prostitution within the United States, the age of consent for marriage, and extreme alcohol consumption. Through Hull House giving a place for people to meet, this helped different unions throughout Chicago and throughout Illinois to strike or to have meetings to improve worker conditions. Some events and things that also occurred during this window that were incredibly important to changing the urban environment was the Triangle Fire in New York, where garment workers were killed on the job. There were widespread boycotts throughout the United States on selected businesses that produced goods and services where they wouldn't allow people to unionize or they abused their employees. And then we have in 1908 the Miller versus Oregon. This is a lawsuit that went forward that it basically guaranteed women a right to work an 8-hour workday and not have to work longer than that. Tenets, the ideas of progressive theory are here. We have to speed up evolution, and evolution not necessarily in the way we believe or we think of evolution in our times, but this is to make people better and by improving the environment, by improving the world around them. If you improve the world around them, the people will do better. Improve society through education. Put people before we put machines and industry. Give a voice to those people who have no voice. Social justice, again, different term, has a different meaning for what it meant then to what it means now. Social justice then was mainly aimed at reform and changing society to make it more egalitarian. And then the last tenet here is to tackle big business and to help break up the trusts that were abusing American workers and creating an environment where only the rich could get rich and the poor would stay poor. So to wrap up in this lesson, we talked about extra credit opportunities that are available in this course. Also, we talked about progressive reform, what led to progressive reform, what how our founding fathers viewed their role in society, what progressive theory meant, and then how society started to attack the conditions that had led to the progressive movement.